And we are live. Hello, guys. Anybody in here, if anyone's here yet, let me know if my sound sounds echoey. We did an interview earlier today. If you're not familiar with the channel, that's basically what we do here is we interview the families of missing persons to help spread awareness. But then when we finished, I didn't get any complaints during it, but when we finished, I noticed the comments were on how bad my sound was. And when I listened back on it, my sound's pretty bad. No one else is. The co-host or the guest didn't sound too bad, so I've moved the mic closer. This mic picks up anything in the room, so sometimes I can have it across the room and you guys don't even notice. But today was pretty bad. So let me know if it still sounds bad or if it sounds okay. Anyone who's here, looks like we got about 5 people in here. So the interview went pretty good tonight, other than the sound issues. Hey, Jilly, welcome, sweetie. Do I sound okay? Or does it sound like I did earlier? That's one of the reasons why I did this tonight. I was going to save this for another night, but I said, "Ooh, that sound was bad. Let me make sure I don't have a mic problem." Sounds good. Okay, good. So, as you guys know, we've been gone for quite a while, and as we rebuild the channel, I'm going to start doing more interviews like usual. We're never going to stop those, but I'm also working on some other things. I want the channel to transform a little bit. I'm going to start doing pre-made edited videos. So this here is sounds very good. Okay, awesome. This here is kind of practice for that, kind of practice reading into the camera and things like that. So I found a website. It's called the True Crime Typewriter or something, is it? Oh, the Electric Typewriter. And it has fairly long true crime stories. I didn't want them too long, but I didn't want it to be like a few paragraphs and then it's over because I wanted to stick to one story per show. So I'm guessing this will be about 30 minutes or so. And I'll do this once or twice a week. We'll have a little late night show. Just trying to switch up the content. This will be a temporary thing. And it'll take the place of the morning shows. We're going to keep doing the interviews. And then we have a morning show weekly. And I'm trying to do one of these weekly. So these kind of things are just fun, extra little content for you guys. And we do like little fundraisers during it, as you guys know. So let me first give thanks to Nick, who donated a little bit earlier. When you guys donate, we give you a thank you on the screen. So thank you to Nick, gave a $10 donation in support. And also we got a member as we were waiting for this to load up. We have Roller Skater Texas Girl, new member. Thank you so much for becoming a member of the channel. You guys can always join right below to become a member, or the link for the PayPal is always in the chat in the description. So this electric typewriter that I found has about 25 stories. So if I do 1 or 2 a week, that'll give us quite a few months of stuff to read. We have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the murder category, 3 in organized crime, scams, forgery, white collar crime. So all different kinds of stuff. I went with the truck stop killer. Like I said, I'm estimating about 30-minute read or so. I'll stop periodically. If a donation comes in, we'll stop and, type it on screen and all that. Or if you guys ask me a question or questions build up, we'll stop. So other than that, I'll try to kind of read straight through. I don't want to be stopping every 5 minutes because I'm guessing if someone's clicking on this true crime story, they're interested in hearing the story. So I tend to, when I do my morning shows, start saying something, then I'll talk to the chat. Then I'll forget what I was saying. I'll go back to something else, talk to the chat. So it bounces around too much. I'm going to try to stick to at least a good 4 or 5 minutes straight of reading the story on these. So again, thank you to Nick G. You see the thank you on the screen there. Anyone who does support the channel, we'll put you on the screen there next to Nick G with the amount. But okay, so this is the truck stop killer. Let me share my screen. Share screen. So you guys can read along if anybody's watching. Allergies. Okay, truck stop killer. Should I do this? Yeah, do something like that. You guys can still see me if you care to. And then this will be on the screen, the main screen. Alrighty. So he was methodical. He rode the highways and he preyed on teenage girls who'd run away. You know what? I got to do this where I can still see the chat in case you guys say something I need to see. Hang on a second. Here we go. There we go. Perfect. Hopefully, you guys can read that if you want to. Don't forget, guys, hit the thumbs up. Thank you, Jilly. That's correct, guys. Please hit the thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not. Girls who'd run away, girls no one would miss. In the summer of 1985, the author was such a girl. One night on I-95, she hitched a ride from a stranger and endured the most terrifying moments of her life. Now, years later, she returns to the scenes of her fugitive youth, looking for clues to that terror in the girls who lost their lives to it. This is a true story, guys, about the truck stop killer. In the summer of 1985, somewhere near Martinsburg, Pennsylvania, the body of a young woman was pulled from a truck stop dumpster. I had just hitched a ride and was sitting in a nearby truck waiting for the driver to pay for gas so we could leave. When they found her, there was shouting. A man from the restaurant ran out and started yelling for everyone to stay away as a small crowd gathered around the dumpster in the rain. Word filtered back that the dead girl was a teenage hitchhiker. I remember thinking it could be me since I was also a teenage hitchhiker. Watching the driver of my truck walk back across the wet asphalt, a second thought arose. It could be him. He could be the killer. The driver reached the cab, swung up behind the wheel, and said we should get going. He said he didn't want to get caught up in anything time-consuming. Stowing his paperwork, he released the brake. Neither of us said anything about the dead girl. As we pulled away, I looked one more time in the side mirror. They were stringing crime tape around the dumpster just as another state trooper rolled into the lot. That ride turned out to be fine. We drove up to Ohio drinking Diet Coke and listening to Bruce Springsteen. The trucker bought me lunch and didn't even try to have sex with me, which made him a prince in my world. Several days later, though, heading south on I-95 through the Carolinas, that's a route I know very well, going from Boston to Florida and back, much of my life, by the way. I got picked up by another trucker who was not fine. I don't remember much about him, except that he was taller and leaner than most truckers and didn't wear jeans or t-shirts. He wore a cotton button-down with the sleeves rolled neatly up over his biceps and had the cleanest cab I ever saw. He must have seemed okay or I wouldn't have gotten in the trunk with him. Once out on the road, though, he changed. He stopped responding to my questions. His bearing shifted. He grew taller in his seat and his face muscles relaxed into something both arrogant and blank. Then he started talking about the dead girl in the dumpster and asked me if I'd ever heard of the Laughing Death Society. We laugh at death, he told me. Let me stop real quick there, guys. That's not something you want to hear, is the truck driver driving you to say, hey, have you heard about the truck driver, the girl who was killed by a truck driver in that dumpster? That's the last thing you want to hear, huh? Gee whiz. A few minutes later, and they talk about the Laughing Death Society. They laugh at death. A few minutes later, he pulled the truck onto the shoulder of the road by some woods, took out a hunting knife, and told me to get into the back of the cab. I began talking, saying the same things over and over. I said I knew he didn't want to do it. I said it was his choice. I said he could do it in a few minutes. I said it was his choice. I said I wouldn't go to the cops if nothing happened to me, but it was his choice. Until he looked at me and I went still. There was going to be no more talking. I knew in my body that it was over. Hey, Shay. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Then he said one word. Run. Without looking back, I ran into the woods and hid. I stayed there until I saw the truck pull onto the interstate. It was getting dark. I was still in shock, so I walked back out to the same road and started hitching south. I never went to the police, and didn't tell anyone for years. So she didn't tell anyone about that. That's kind of surprising. And not a good move, because he's probably going to do that to other girls. Hey, Chris. Hey, Shay. Chris, I did post your link, brother. Oh, thank you. You mean this live here? You're welcome. Let's try to do something a little fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the interview earlier. We have a couple more coming this week too. We have one coming next Saturday and then another one this week, I should say. Ooh, you 1 second, drink some water, guys. Thanks for joining us. You've seen it? Okay, cool. Yeah, I posted it on my personal Facebook page and on my my group Facebook page for the channel. I have a Facebook group, and then also in the description of the video. So I put a bunch of places for you, brother. This spring, a friend sent a news story link about a serial killer with the subject line, "Is this your guy?" The serial killer's name was Robert Ben Rhodes. Rhodes was a long-haul trucker in jail since 1990 who had recently been convicted of a couple new cold cases. Give me 1 second, guys. I think we have a PayPal donation. 132. Oh, no. Okay, that was the older one. Okay, sorry. I thought we got another one. Give me 1 second. I didn't recognize him from the initial photos, but as I found pictures of him as a younger man, his face came to seem more familiar. The glasses were the same, the curve of the cheekbone, and something about the expression, particularly the set of the mouth. It had the same neutral arrogance. Rhodes looked like the guy who picked me up. But then Rhodes looked like a lot of guys. He would only have been 39 at the time, and I remember the trucker as an older man with light brown or graying hair. To a teenager, though, someone pushing 40 is pretty old, and hair often looks darker in photos. The light in my memory is strange, too. It was a cloudy day just before a summer storm, and everything in the truck is cast in gray. That's very true. When you are younger, 40 might as well be 70. It's like... And as you get into your late 20s, 40 seems like young, especially when you're in your early 30s. You're like, I'm going to be 40 soon. After receiving my friend's email, I left messages with the FBI, but was relieved when they were not returned. The memory was 27 years old, and nothing in it was actionable, meaning the guy let her go, so they're probably not going to go look for him. Even though he pulled out a knife, I would say that's pretty actionable, but... The photos stayed in my head, though, and with them came questions. What if the man who pulled the knife on me really did murder the hitchhiker? Why did he let me go? Who was the girl in the dumpster? Why didn't I go to anyone? I needed to understand what my responsibility was and to find my own answers, if nobody else's, so I began to look. I would say that was a big mistake on her part, because you got away, but he's not going to let everyone away. So, yeah. If there's something like that happens to you, it is your responsibility to report it. And I understand it's rough to put that on somebody, but you just have to. I have no fascination with serial killers, so I didn't realize that Rhodes was famous. There are articles, TV episodes, and books on him. Driven to Kill, Roadside Prey, Killer on the Road. And from these sources, I learned that every grim and secret fear I have about the human race is manifest in Robert Ben Rhodes. Rhodes was a sexual sadist. He kidnapped women, tortured and raped them for weeks before killing them. What is known about him in the 1980s is murky. He was involved in the BDSM and swinger scene in his hometown of Houston. He was married. When he was caught, he said that he had been doing this for 15 years, which would put the onset of his murders back into the 1970s. His trucking logs placed him in the area of 50 unsolved murders in the 3 years prior to his arrest alone. While not all 50 cases have been tied to Rhodes yet, and Rhodes himself has admitted to only 3 murders, the FBI has strong reason to believe that at his peak he was killing 1 to 3 women a month. Rhodes was first arrested when an Arizona state trooper found a screaming woman named Lisa Pinal chained in the back of his cab. He was charged with kidnapping and assault. What put him away for life, though, was the rape and murder of Regina Walters, a 14-year-old girl from Pasadena, Texas. Rhodes picked her up, along with her boyfriend Ricky Jones, in February of 1990. Jones was promptly killed, and his remains were discovered later in Mississippi. Rhodes kept Regina for at least 2 weeks. He shaved her head and pubic hair, pierced her with fishing hooks, dressed her up in a black dress and heels, and photographed her in moments of terror, then killed her with a garrote. How do you say that? Garrote or garrote? Garrote. I think it's garrote. If it's garrote, type 1. If it's garrote, type 2. If you know. Made of baling wire, leaving her 100-pound body to decompose in a barn in Illinois off Interstate 70. It's amazing on those highways, all the horror that has happened. All those truck, those killers that roam the highways. It's garrote, right? One for garrote. Okay. That's one of those words I never knew how to say. Isn't it funny when you see people reading something like this and you can tell that they come across a word like that? I can't think of some of them. Some of them are so hilarious, but you can tell they've never heard the word. They've only read it. I always think it's funny when that happens. Real quick, and I'll get back to the story. But that for years, do you guys know when they make a movie about somebody, it's called a biopic. I always said biopic. I don't know why. Just biopic sounded like it didn't make sense to me. So I always said, a new biopic's coming out. And then once I heard somebody say biopic, I was like, biopic? That's not how you say that word. That was one of my words that I did that with. But I always think it's funny when you can tell someone reads a word and you can tell they've never heard it. They've only read it. Anyway, behind the tragic elements of Regina's story, like some kind of pentimento, I saw my own. Like me, she left home with her older boyfriend. Also like me, Regina became dependent upon the grace of truck drivers. That's a terrifying thing to be dependent of. So never put yourself dependent on truck drivers, please. In her weeks with Rhodes, and again, 99.99% of them are great people, I'm sure, but it only takes one. In her weeks with Rhodes, many drivers saw her, but somehow no alarm was raised. She passed through that world as if she were invisible. In 1985, my biggest problem was sleep. There was no safe way for me to get it. I left home in early January, hitchhiking south from New York City with my 21-year-old boyfriend. We had $60 and a Smith & Wesson 5-shot with one bullet in it, which we accidentally fired off in a field in Maryland during a discussion about whether the safety was on. Good thing it wasn't pointed at one of them. I had a guitar and a knapsack full of souvenirs of my girlhood. Notes from friends, earrings, and song lyrics. I was 15. People don't leave home because things are going well. They leave because they feel they have to. Excuse me. In right or wrong, that's how I felt. I lived with my mom in New York, and the fights between us were growing in intensity and emotional violence. I don't think either of us knew what to do about it. There was talk of me going to live with my dad in Virginia, where I had traditionally spent my summers. By then, though, I had been kicked out of 2 schools for absences and was cutting myself regularly. My emotions were a planet around which I spun like a moon. As I saw it, it didn't matter if I left because in so many ways I was already gone. On my way out, I destroyed every single picture of me over the age of 12 so that there would be nothing to give to the police. I wonder if this person dealt with some kind of abuse at home, I would guess. Author of this story, is this her? Okay, this is the author here, if you guys can see. It says, is that her at 15? She looks a lot older than 15. As a 15-year-old, the author left home and became a hitchhiker, hopping from semi to semi on the interstate. Something people did much more commonly back in the day as opposed to now, but that's crazy. This girl, if you told me this girl was 25, I'd believe it. 28 even, maybe even 30, but wow, that's an old-looking 15-year-old. Guess from hard living, right? That first night, my boyfriend and I stayed in an abandoned barn in Maryland. It was off the side of the freeway and probably very much like the one Regina Walters was found in. The barn had a loft with wind coming through broken slats and was surrounded by the same kind of brown grassy field and frozen mud. Like Regina, I also had a little journal and probably wrote something in it that night because it was far too cold to sleep. We were back on the road before dawn, walking down a highway covered in black ice, shivering in our hoodies. A trucker picked us up at daybreak, and I rode in a semi for the very first time. Being up high, warm, and looking out over traffic was a great improvement. The trucker bought us chicken fried steak, chatted amiably, and let us nap in the cab while he drove. While we were asleep, he pulled into a small truck stop, and I woke to his hand down my shirt. See? I kept my eyes closed, stayed still, then rolled away from him, pretending I was still asleep. That's a terrified person that catches you doing something that awful and chooses to just pretend they didn't notice it. It means she's terrified. And who can blame her in a strange man's cab? where he's driving and has all the power. A few minutes later, I got up like nothing had happened. The trucker went to pay for gas, and my boyfriend and I went to use the bathroom. When we came back, the truck was gone, and every reminder of home with it. My guitar, my knapsack, everything except the Smith & Wesson, which we sold later in New Orleans. I'm surprised she didn't run there, to be honest with you. I guess she had nowhere to go, and she figured she had her boyfriend to protect her, but I would have been out of that truck instantly. But either way, she left her stuff there and he took it. That first ride was a preview of how it would often go for me with truckers, dodging sex and getting stranded. But I had learned one crucial lesson. When a truck slows down, you get up. Getting sleep was pretty easy with a boyfriend because one of us could stay awake. 6 weeks later, though, we parted ways. Somewhere in Arizona, we had a fight in a gas station off I-10, and we each climbed into separate trucks, and that was it. Wow, it must have been a hell of a fight to just leave each other in the middle of nowhere like that. Sleeping by myself on the street made me a target, and having sex with some creepy old guy for a spot on a mattress also held little appeal. So I went back to hitchhiking in circles and discovered a state of half consciousness wherein I could be asleep and not asleep at the same time. You can do that. I don't know if anyone's ever done that, but I have slept like that in the past when I worked certain kinds of jobs where I could kind of sleep. You can kind of be half asleep and rest your brain, but you're not fully asleep. It's really hard to explain, but anyone who's ever done it knows what she's talking about. And I'm sure you have to do it in her case. I could rest but not dream. And that, of course, is because she can't fall into deep sleep, REM sleep, I think they call it, where you dream. I could tell you the last 3 songs played on the radio if you asked, but only if you asked. If you didn't, I had no memory of them at all. I stuck to trucks because they were safer than cars. When you get in a truck at a truck stop, everyone notices. They chatter about it on the CB, and you are driving off in what amounts to a huge billboard advertising the name of the company. That's interesting. I never thought of that. I need visibility to stay alive. But it was also a dangerous form of brinksmanship, because if a trucker was going to cross the line, the higher stakes meant he was going to do it for real. There was a gap before that line, and most truckers wouldn't take it that far. I lived in that gap. Truck stops in the 1980s were closed worlds where what went on passed unnoticed on the outside. The stores were dimly lit and filled with smoke, radically different from the family travel plazas of today. Magazine porn often dominated the aisles. Glossies like Hustler and Barely Legal, but also newsprint rags with cheap color covers. Bottles of isobutyl nitrate and rot gut aphrodisiacs like Locker Room and Spanish Fly crowded the counters by the register, along with the iconic bumper sticker, ass, gas, or grass, no one rides for free. Yikes. That's not a fun thing to see when you're in her position, huh? You know which one of those they want. Spanish Fly, if anyone doesn't know, that was supposed to be something that made you horny back in the day. I don't know if they ever verified if that works, but I highly doubt it. It's probably one of those, what do you call it? Snake oil or whatever, fake things. Back then, though, my thoughts weren't on misogyny. They were on logistics. I needed to find rides and usually couldn't get into the restaurant. What I'm curious of, if she's not really going anywhere, why does she need a ride so bad? Why just hitchhike around the country? What's different from just staying in one spot and making it work there? I guess the ride is like the hotel tour. That's where she can sleep because she doesn't want to stay in one spot. I don't know. The general rule was that you were a prostitute until proven otherwise. That's why she couldn't get into the restaurant. She was assumed to be a prostitute until you proved otherwise, and then you were still a prostitute. Waitresses were the first to kick you out. That's interesting. That forced me into asking for rides in the hallway by the showers. Over time, I learned safer ways of getting rides by having truckers navigate the CB radio for me. Women couldn't really get on the zoo channel, as they called it then, because the sound of their voice would trigger 20 minutes of crass chatter. There was only one word for woman on the CB, and that was beaver. Even the guys who were trying to help had used it. They had to make up stories for me. I got a beaver, needs a ride to Flagstaff for her grandma's funeral. Don't want no trouble. Come on back. So she's having guys go on the CB radio because when she does it herself, a woman's voice triggers people going crazy. So that doesn't tell you this isn't a place you don't want to be. This is not the stuff a young single girl by herself alone should be doing. There was always, it was more common back then. Definitely don't want to do it now, but there was always a sick mom or dead grandparent involved, and I was almost always abandoned by my jerk of a boyfriend who'd made off with all my money in my car. Meaning that's the story she gave. Through these stories, I jumped from truck to truck. Like a lemur in a canopy of trees, I barely saw the ground. Even so, it still wasn't safe to sleep. Adhering to my rule that the only safe truck was a moving truck meant I woke when a truck took an exit. So as long as it was moving, she would sleep. Once it started to slow down, she'd shoot up. She knew, what's he stopping for? Even so, it still wasn't safe to sleep. Adhering, meant I woke up when a truck took an exit. I woke when it slowed for traffic, when it turned, when it downshifted, when it drifted towards the shoulder, I woke. Wearing down from lack of sleep and trying to get a handle on my risk level, I began to work off a 1 to 5 scale of sexually aggressive behavior. Number 1, the driver kept urges to himself. Number 2, the driver asked me to have sex and offered to pay. That's scary that's only number 2 on the 5 scale. Number 3, you told me I owed you sex for the ride and chicken fried steak and threatened to drop me off somewhere dangerous. Number 4, they dropped her off somewhere dangerous, so they actually did it. Number 5, she had to jump when you slowed down because you were going to rape me. So number 5 is she knows for a fact it's going to happen as soon as they start to slow down. She jumps out of the truck. That's a hell of a scale. Only one of the 5 is not someone trying to have sex with her. Most truckers occupied the middle of the scale, but the trucker who resembled Rhodes didn't have a place on it. Anybody who pulls a knife on you in an enclosed space like a truck is terrifying. But beyond that, it was the man's demeanor that was so chilling. He wasn't nervous, angry, or excited. He was grave and methodical, as if preparing to dress a deer. Dress a deer means to kind of cut it open. For anyone who doesn't know, I don't do that at all. I don't know how I know that. I think I read it somewhere once, but it means, I'm pretty sure, cut it and cut it all up and stuff. I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure. Drink some water. The voice starts to crackle. From reading about Rhodes, I knew that he preferred hitchhikers to prostitutes and specifically targeted runaways. Of course, because it takes a long time before anyone knows a runaway's missing. Sometimes never. I also knew the first thing he did was to get them into the back of his sleeper cab, which had anchor points for shackles. But I hadn't seen any shackles. I only saw the man with the knife. It has to be him, a friend said. How many of those guys could there be? We're about 50-60% of the way through, guys. So we'll stop real quick. Here is a picture of her, of the author. So the girl telling the story, of course. This is a first-hand account, as is pretty obvious. Oh, this is nerd. So this is one of serial killer Robert Ben Rhodes' last victims, Regina Walters. This is the one that was found in the barn in Illinois. Did he take this picture? This is the one he's serving life for. So let me see. She looks similar to the author. Let me go look. Right? Yeah, I think so. TGI says, I was a teenage runaway in the early 80s, and like this author, I hitchhiked with my boyfriend. You don't snitch because you will be returned to the home abuse you are running from. Great story. Oh, wow. I'm sorry to hear that, TGI. I hope everything worked out for you today in the long run. It's awful. I couldn't even imagine. First thing I was thinking while reading this is I'd hate to be in this story, but it sounds like you went through something very similar. Okay, we're about halfway through, maybe. Maybe not even, actually. Wow, this is a long one. We might finish it all, depending on how it goes, guys. So real quick again, thank you to Nick G, who did donate $10 earlier. The link is in the description as well as the chat. Anybody who wants to support the channel. We use these little stories and morning shows and stuff kind of as like little fundraisers and stuff. So if anyone wants to support, you can. And we will give you a shout out on the main channel if you do. Where? Okay, that's how I had it. And thank you also to Teenage Roller Skater Texas Girl for becoming a member. Okay, well, story's getting good. Here's the picture where we stopped. Okay. According to the FBI, so where did we, hang on. Okay, it has to be him. How many of those guys could there be? Was where we ended. According to the FBI, quite a few. In 2009, the feds went public with a program called the Highway Serial Killings Initiative in response to a rising number of dead bodies found along the interstates. Some of these were women left in dumpsters. Narrowing the field to those last seen around truck stops and rest areas, the Bureau counted over 500 bodies, almost all women. Of the 200 people on a suspect list, almost all of them were long-haul truckers. TGI says, I'm good, was never raped, but I think I met a serial killer in Hot Springs, Arkansas. We left out the window. Oh my God. Never was confirmed, or you never saw him in a story like this. You could be the author here. And then years later, seeing the guy again, that must be frightening. Just imagine what could have happened. But nobody had to tell me that people like Rhodes killed people like me, excuse me, and got away with it. Going through the truck stops, I'd heard about women getting their throats slit or strangled. I'd heard of at least one who got hung up on a meat hook in the back of a refrigerated trailer because a trucker thought she'd given him VD, venereal disease. At night, I listened to the voices of prostitutes on the CB, barely intelligible between streams of name calling. Hello, honey, it's me, Sugar Bear, in Party Row. Anyone want to party? Which reminds me of myself at that age. Wow. I'm glad things are better for you now, TGI. Lot lizards is what truckers call prostitutes who work at truck stops. And since many drivers don't distinguish between hitchhikers and prostitutes, I was a lot lizard too. If we went missing, months could pass before a report was filed. Of course, no one knows when you're running away, when you're all over the place. No one knows where you are. If we went missing, months could pass before a report was filed, and by then there was little to connect the missing person in one state with the decomposed remains in another, especially before DNA. You were never going to figure it out. When the Illinois state trooper who was trying to identify the body of Regina Walters, the girl Rose left in that barn, put her forensic description out on the national teletype, he was totally unprepared for the response. He requested information on missing Caucasian females, aged 13 to 15 years old, who had disappeared 6 to 9 months earlier. He got over 900 matches. If there was any way to connect my story to Rhodes, it would be through the body of the girl in the dumpster. Records on her would provide a date and a place that could then be checked against Rhodes' trucking logs. To at least one of my questions, was Rhodes my guy, I'd have a clear answer. A simple yes or no. I began by Googling things like dead girl truck stop Martinsburg. Nothing came up, but that wasn't too surprising. Her murder happened 27 years ago and was essentially pre-internet. I pulled up a map of Martinsburg, Pennsylvania, and that's where things started to get hazy. Martinsburg was nothing but a pinprick, just a dot on a minor route feeding into a mid-sized highway on the outskirts of Altoona, Pennsylvania. Not the sort of place you'd expect to find a busy truck stop. Had I confused the state? I did a search on towns named Martinsburg. There were 7 within range: Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Missouri, West Virginia, and New York, all less than a day's drive apart. TGI says, I was never alone. My boyfriend stayed with me throughout. We're still together. Oh, that's awesome. Well, that at least... I mean, of course, it still is dangerous, but a lot safer than being completely alone for sure. That's awesome that you guys are still together. It sounds like you went through a hell of a time there. And basically, when people go through times like that, typically, if they don't break up then they're together for the long haul because, you know, you go through the worst that you're probably going to go through, then you're going to stick together. A week before the girl was found in the dumpster, though, I'd gone to see my dad in Virginia. At the time, he was struggling himself, living with several other guys in a house where you flush the toilet with a bucket of water, and working what little construction there was in the county. I quickly realized I would have been nothing but a burden. The morning I left, I asked him to take me to the closest truck stop so I could get a ride going toward California. It was a made-up destination, a Grapes of Wrath narrative of brighter futures. I was sure he would remember where he took me back then. So last spring I called him. I didn't tell him about my recent inquiries at first. I just asked where he dropped me off. Without any hesitation, he said Martinsburg, West Virginia. So she did mess up the state. She thought it was Pennsylvania. Were there any murders that summer, I asked him. There was that hitchhiker. You called and left a message a day or so after I dropped you off saying I was going to read about a dead 17-year-old hitchhiker they found in a truck stop and that it wasn't you. That's scary. Imagine you drop your daughter off. I mean, I wouldn't be dropping my daughter off to do that anyways. I'd have her stay with me no matter what. But imagine if you did do that and then you see a story, someone her age is found. It's a good thing she called him. My whole body relaxed. My memory may have been bent by sleep deprivation, but it was not crazy. There was a Martinsburg truck stop somewhere in my story, and there was a dead 17-year-old hitchhiker. She had existed enough for me to call my dad all those years ago and warn him about what he would read. And if it happened, she could be found. It was just a matter of looking harder. You can always find stuff, even if it's before the internet. Just stopping real quick, guys. I'm really good at finding things online, even stuff before the internet and even before social media. I grew up with a different group of kids and we lost track of each other throughout the years, anywhere from like 12 to 18. And then in my like late 20s, I went looking like, what happened to all my old friends? And I found every single one of them. Nowadays, that might sound like, oh, that's hard. But this is before social media where it was pretty hard. But you can always find stuff. There's very little stuff that's not online at all. The original Rhodes investigation had woven a complex web, entangling local and federal agencies in 5 different states. Eventually, the locus shifted to the Houston FBI because at some point, every thread ran through Texas. Rhodes was from Texas. His wife, Deborah Davis, was from Texas. Regina Walters and Ricky Jones were from Texas. He picked up 2 of his other victims in Texas. I flew to Austin to meet with 2 retired FBI men, Special Agents Mark Young and Robert F. Lee, who'd both worked on the case. Young was a profiler for the Bureau as well as a field agent. Over lunch at a local sushi place, he taught me the difference between a mode of operation and a signature. Modes of operation change. They are more like habits, he said, and can adapt to circumstances or mood. Rhodes, for instance, used guns and ligature strangulation and probably knives too. A signature, however, does not change. Sexual sadists in particular work off erotic maps established early on. They get more nuanced and elaborate, but the basic topography remains the same. One of Rhodes' signatures was shaving the head and pubic hair of his female victims. Piercings around the breasts, bruising, and other signs of torture were also frequently found. So by signature, of course, they mean, there are things that don't change, that whatever turns the guy on, kind of whatever is linked to his reasoning for being a sicko, they'll get more elaborate, but they'll always be rooted in the same kind of sick, perversions, let's say. Whereas the method of how he kills them can change. He can some years strangle them and then he starts stabbing them, for example. But it'll always be the sexual interests that don't change, kind of thing. Young, a 6'4" Texan and 3rd-generation lawman, opened his laptop and pulled up a picture of a woman named Shanna Holtz. Only days before Regina Walters was taken, Rhodes had been detained by the police in Houston for the possible sexual assault and kidnapping of Holtz. She'd been picked up in a truck stop, shackled into the back of the cab, tortured, and raped for weeks. She'd escaped when Rhodes pulled into a Houston brewery. I'd always read that she got away because Rhodes forgot to chain her in, but I found out from Young that she'd not been shackled when she'd escaped. Rhodes had told her to sit there and be a good girl, but Holtz, 18 years old, had been on the street since she was 12. By her own account, she had been raped at least 20 times and had already had a baby. Yikes. She knew how to survive. Whatever the man thought he had broken in her had already been broken and healed back stronger. She didn't do what he expected. She ran. She brought the police right back to Rhodes' truck, but then balked at pressing charges, so they had to let him go. The story was that she was too scared, but I wondered if there was more. I'm gonna blow my nose, guys. My allergies are killing me. Give me 1 second. Pretty far down now, 50-60% of the way. Probably try to finish it today if we can. Give me about a minute or two just to blow my nose, and I'll be right back. I hate when it messes with my speaking. Gotta get some Flonase or something. All right. We still got a decent little crew here. Still got our 15 or so people. All right. I looked at the picture on Young's computer. Shanna was a pretty girl with freckles and blank blue eyes. Her thick reddish blonde hair had been cropped close to her head with a knife or scissors and was now grown back. With all her freckles, she looked very Irish. Around her neck was a dog chain with a padlock attached to the ring that had been used to restrain her neck. But in the picture, with her inch-long hair and dog collar, she looked like a gutter punk, like any girl you might see in any university district. Young then showed me some photos of Rhodes in the 1980s that had come from his wife. In one, he relaxed on the grass in a park. The natural light brought his hair closer to the color I remembered, and again, the side view heightened the key similarities. His cheekbone shape, glasses, the expression. But as I had learned from the echo chamber of Martinsburg, memory is strange territory. By now, papers and photographs were spread out all over the table, and Young was waiting for me to tell my story. Although I'd told him more in the preceding week than in the past 2 decades, I still wasn't used to doing it, and the nausea still came. One thing I always did, I told Young, was rifle through a trucker's cassette case as soon as we were out on the highway. This gave me a screen behind which to observe drivers when they thought I was distracted. It allowed me to pretend not to hear scary red flag comments so I could act dumb and get away later. And this is what I was doing that day, going through a tape case, chatting like an idiot, and watching the driver, which is why I saw him change. I told Young about the Laughing Death Society. He'd never heard the phrase. I asked about the knife. Every trucker I ever met had a gun, so the knife seemed significant. He said a gun was about control, but a knife is personal. I'd seen the page from Regina's little notebook on which Rhodes... Excuse me, guys, it's getting late. In which Rhodes... Where are we? In which Rhodes had drawn a picture of a gun and a huge dagger dripping blood next to the words, "Ricky is a dead man." So was the trucker I met a true psychopath, I asked? What I find interesting is that he told you about the body of the girl and talked about the Laughing Death Society while he was still driving. You were not under his control. This tells me he liked manipulating through terror, that it turned him on just like Rhodes. Then we have, you guys can still see, right? Yeah. So this is an unidentified girl shown here in a photograph taken by Rhodes. So these are pictures by Rhodes in his truck. All these girls look very similar. Dark hair, similar shaped face, pretty girls. But a real serial killer wouldn't have let me go, right? I asked. Maybe he didn't think you'd run. Even at the time, I'd wondered if my running was part of the game. I thought that's what it was going to be. When he said run, I thought he was going to chase her like some kind of sick run and see if I can catch you. But she said he drove off. Oh God, I wasn't tied 2 minutes ago. No. Oh, we got a comment on our previous video. Even at the time, I'd wondered if my running was part of the game. Rhodes was a great lover of games. His favorite book was Games People Play, wherein each social encounter is treated as a transaction or game. One game in the book is called Courtroom, another's called Beat Me Daddy, another Frigid Woman. In that one, driven by penis envy, a woman's inner child taunts a man into seducing her so that she can be freed from guilt for her own sadistic fantasies. Games People Play was a Bible for Rhodes. He talked about it frequently and applied its ideas. In a letter to his wife on the subject of psychological games, he wrote, I always told you there were 3 things you could do: play, pass, or run. The phrase play, pass, or run is used twice in the letter. Reading it, I found it hard not to hear the man telling me to run. The more I learned about Rhodes, the more I saw parallels between us. While I was hitchhiking, he was driving. And while I was getting more adept at survival, he was getting more adept at killing. On the table in front of Young was a snapshot of Regina Walters that I hadn't seen, taken not very long before she was abducted, which is the photo we saw earlier. In it, she's sitting in the backseat of a car. The sun is coming down on her long hair, and she's laughing. She looks like any other skinny kid just out of middle school. She looks happy. Wait a minute. Okay, never mind. I thought I was talking about the first one that looked older. I'm like, middle school. The picture was given to Young by Regina's mom. Initially, agents had disagreed over whether the young girl on Rhodes' film was Regina. It was Agent Young who recognized the small gap in Regina's teeth and noticed that a few freckles were in the same place. Oh, wow, we're already 47 minutes in. What did I initially guess? 30? Oh, my God. That's a long story. Young pulled out one last picture and slid it across to me. The photo was of a beautiful young girl, possibly Native American. She was on the end of the roll with Regina, he said. She's shown sitting in Rhodes' truck wearing a gray hoodie. Her eyes are partly closed, as if she's stoned or sleepy. Rhodes must have just picked her up because he hasn't cut her hair yet. It is glossy, black, and long. No one knows who she is. My back is so itchy and I can't reach it. I get this itch in my back in one certain spot. It drives me crazy, guys. I might need to take a second to... Give me a second. It's been going for like the last minute. Sorry. Give me 1 second. Sorry, it drives me crazy. Have you ever had an itch you can't get to? It's like you can't think of anything until you fix it. Give me 1 second, guys. Let me just check and see if anybody has all right. So if anyone would like to support the channel, guys, the link to do so is in the description, as well as in the chat. We do appreciate anyone who helps out, helps us do more interviews and all kinds of stuff. So we appreciate you if you can. We appreciate you if you can't. Either way. Okay. On the phone, Agent Robert F. Lee was civil and to the point, but not overtly warm. I arrived at his door, melting in the 100-degree heat. He welcomed me into his spacious living room. Tall and square-jawed, Lee looked like he could probably still tackle a bank robber. Behind him was a shoulder-high pink plastic castle. Granddaughter, he said, On the couch beside me was a large pillow with the FBI seal. That's for my old SWAT jacket, he grinned. They don't use that emblem now. Looks too much like a target. The question of what you do with your old SWAT jacket when you retire had never entered my mind. Clearly, the answer is make a throw pillow. I got the sense Lee appreciated brevity, which is to be brief, talk quick. So I dispensed with small talk and went straight to my questions, but he stopped me. I just want you to know, he said, looking at me squarely in the eye, that what Rhodes did to women, he did to women. You didn't do it. Everything I expected from Bob Lee changed in that moment. I had not told him or anyone else about how I felt about failing to go to the cops. These were my private feelings. The idea that I might have been responsible for what happened to girls like Regina was devastating. And Lee's directness startled me. It was a raw moment. So I told him the truth, which I had not told others, that I didn't say anything because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Well, said Lee, sitting back after I had finished, you're probably right. Look at Lisa Penal. Penal was the woman chained into Rhodes' truck when they arrested him in Arizona. When rescued, she was wearing fuzzy lined slippers, talking secret prisons, and being on a mission to see the president. Just the kind of testimony that makes most detectives stop taking notes, since they're looking at someone who can't stand trial. Her statement was videotaped the night she was freed from Rhodes' truck. Lee still uses the tape when he trains police detectives in interrogation. He shows it and asks what they think is going on. Most say she's a prostitute and that it's a transaction gone bad. Between Penal and Rhodes, it's Rhodes they believe. Of course, Lee says, Lisa was talking all sorts of crazy stuff. Microchips in her brain, holes in the ozone layer. She was wearing those slippers, but she was telling the truth. So they're saying that she seemed kind of crazy, and when FBI recruits or whatever see the truck, they believe the serial killer and not the victim. I had a vision of Lisa Penal as a truck stop Callie roaming the back lots in her denim skirt and fuzzy slippers with an ozone hole for a halo. She would be easy to dismiss. Rhodes intentionally chose women who lacked credibility. That makes sense. Sometimes, as with Shanna Holtz, the girl who had escaped in the brewery, the sense of not being credible was internalized. Lee told me that the final lines of Holtz's police statement read, I don't see any good in filing charges. It's just going to be my word against his. If there was any evidence, I would file charges and sue him. It took me a second to understand those last sentences. What evidence was she lacking? She was found running naked, screaming down a street in Houston with DNA all over her body. Her head and pubic hair shaved, still with his chain around her neck. How could she lack evidence? But I thought about what she'd said. It would just be my word against his, which was clearly followed by the unvoiced thought, and who is going to believe me? I could easily imagine my own teenage voice whispering those same words. The more I learned about Rhodes, the more I saw parallels between us. Did I read this? It wasn't lost on me that while I was hitchhiking and he was driving, we would both have struggled with some of the same challenges. Sleep deprivation and the hypnotic dullness of going through identical locations over and over. A world constructed of boredom and violence. And while I was getting more adept at survival, he was very likely getting more adept at killing. We both had our own systems, our own rituals, and our own beliefs about what people were really like and how they acted under pressure. That is a very repetitive and can be boring existence. Truck driver, it's going the same routes. Like I said, I lived from Boston to Florida. I took that route. If you count going, down and then back as twice, took it, I think it was like 18 times. So I know that feeling of like, oh, there's this city again. And I drive through it every few months or so. It's not a great feeling. It's very boring. And every time you do it, you say to yourself, I'm never doing this again. I'm just going to fly next time. And then you find yourself doing it again. I don't know why. Then I drove once from Boston to California, LA, which was a much longer drive, but because you break it up better, when you go from Boston to Florida, you're kind of like, let me just get as much of it done as I can. Let me try to do it in one shot. So you just drive yourself to death. Whereas when you're going much farther, like 3 to 5 times farther from Boston to LA, you kind of just expect it's going to be 5-6 days, and you don't try to kill yourself. So it's actually a much easier drive. I have a couple crazy stories from those drives, though. If you want me to tell you sometime, I will. Nothing like this, of course, but a couple odd coincidences. So I'd put off writing Rhodes, mostly because I didn't want him to write me back. The time had come to do it anyway. Mark Young said Rhodes likes to feel like an expert and that I should ask him to educate me. So while writing my letter, I used permissive language, saying I wanted him to teach me what I did right and what I did wrong when I was traveling. Knowing the capacity of his sadism made this unbearable. Rhodes didn't live a double life as much as a shadowed one. There's a picture of him in leather and chains that floats around the internet. It's actually from a Halloween party in Houston where he went as a slave, led on a chain by his wife, who was dressed as a dominatrix. So he was married, huh? This is the picture. They always look like this, huh? Like you could totally picture this guy at a desk at some finance company, just completely blending in, kind of like a smart looking, normal, boring dude. It's always what they look like. Isn't it crazy? It's never like the guy you think it would be that totally stands out and looks like a lunatic. That guy's always normal and is a good dad. Isn't it crazy? Odd coincidences. Deborah Davis and Rhodes met in the early 80s at a Houston bar called Chip Kickers. Rhodes was dressed that night as an airline pilot, and it was months before Davis found out he wasn't one. The remarkable thing is that when she did, she didn't dump him, but Rhodes was cunning and highly charismatic. They always are. When the FBI extradited him to Illinois, he was able to get a phone number off a waitress while shackled hand and foot and wearing an orange prison suit. This obviously doesn't recommend the waitress's judgment, but at least some of the credit has to go to Rhodes. I finally got to Davis through Agent Young. He sent me a text just as I was leaving Texas saying that Debbie was ready to talk. Excuse me, guys. We're getting close, guys. We're about 70% done. Thanks to everyone for sticking with me. We've had about the same amount of people for the majority. I called as soon as I landed. Today, Davis lives in College Station, Texas, and her kids, the product of our previous marriage, are grown. She occasionally speaks on domestic violence at conferences and in classrooms at AM. At the school? She's tried to put the years with Rhodes behind her, but still gets letters from him sporadically. Sometimes they're threatening, sometimes cajoling, but always manipulative. According to her, in the summer of 1985, Rhodes was driving for a trucking company based in Georgia that has an office right on I-95. For anyone who doesn't know, I-95 covers the entire eastern coast. It goes from pretty much, it's from Boston to Florida, but I'm pretty sure it definitely goes to New Hampshire, and I'm almost sure it goes to Maine, pretty much to the Canadian border. I don't know if it goes into Canada too or what, but it's the entire eastern coast. I believe it's the longest highway in the country, unless there's a longer one going horizontal. There could be, but it's one of the longest, if not the. But I ran my story past her. When I got to the part about the sudden switch in his behavior, she got excited. That's him. That's exactly like him, she said. She also said Rhodes often left his gun at home in the beginning and could have used the knife. There were other points where she saw similarities and would say, that sounds like Bob, but these were less emphatic, and it was hard to tell what she really thought. Like Young and Lee, she had never heard of the Laughing Death Society, and since it had featured so strongly in my experience, I thought it salient. What does salient mean? S-A-L-I-E-N-T? Salient. I'll have to look it up after. I feel like I know it, but I can't think of it. But yeah, 95. It's funny because I live off 95 now. I could be at 95 in about 7 minutes from where I live now. And in Florida, I lived about 15 minutes off 95. So I was used to joke and say, I moved right down the street when I moved from Boston to Florida. Let's go right down 95. Took it the whole way. Davis mentioned the case of Colleen. Don't you think that fact starts to rule him out? She's asking about him not mentioning the society. Oh, no, not at all, she said. Bob was fascinated by secret societies. Davis mentioned the case of Colleen Stan, a 21-year-old hitchhiker who had been kidnapped in 1977. I did a story on this girl, Colleen Stan, by a couple who tortured her and kept her as a sex slave for 7 years while she slept in a box under their bed. Eventually, she was left unbound. They kept her from running away by convincing her that a secret society called The Company would find her and bring her back. Bob was obsessed with how they used an imaginary secret society to keep her from running away, said Davis. Yeah, that story was sick. She literally lived in a box under their bed. And once they finally gave her some freedom, she believed if she ran The Company with a killer family. It's crazy. It made sense. As a true sexual sadist, Rhodes would have been interested in a level of submission requiring no chains. He told Shanna Holtz to sit there and be a good girl. Regina Walters had been seen in Chicago, standing freely outside his truck in a public place. Do you remember what he was wearing? Davis asked quietly. She was the only person who asked me this, and of course I did. Or rather, I remember what he was not wearing. He was not wearing jeans. Give me a second, guys. I'm sorry. I should mute when I blow my nose. Sorry about that. Picture people driving in a car like, ugh. He was not wearing a t-shirt. He was not wearing flannel. His clothes were gray or blue, but that may have been the light. Deborah told me that Bob always wore matching Dickies, usually dark blue. He liked people to think he was in uniform, she said. The airline pilot's outfit came to mind. Do you remember what his cab looked like? Meticulously clean. That sure sounds like Bob. When I first saw his apartment, I thought I'd walked into the showroom of a furniture store. Even in jail, his shirt and pants were always ironed and pressed. In Martinsburg, West Virginia, where the truck stop should be, is a massive Walmart stretching flat and endless along a parking lot the size of a lake. 5 years ago, the truck stop was demolished along with its restaurant. The only thing they neglected to take down is a website with the words Martinsburg Travel Center of America flashing like a beacon online. The whole thing seemed so uncanny. Everywhere I looked, evidence of these girls was disappearing. I hadn't been able to get a copy of Shanna Holt's police report because I was told there was no official suspect. Lisa Pinal's full statement, it turned out, had been destroyed for file space. Now the whole Martinsburg truck stop had been swallowed by a Walmart supercenter. Walmart supercenters seem to be swallowing pretty much everything. I'm saying that, not the story. I knew from talking to Martinsburg police that the truck stop had been under the jurisdiction of the Berkeley County Sheriff. I called the office. A chipper recorded voice told me to press 1 for TAS, T-A-S, 2 for guns. All other callers stay on the line. I finally spoke to a woman and asked if they had a homicide record for a girl who may have been found in the Martinsburg truck stop during the summer of 1985. We don't have any records, she told me. I thought she meant digitized. I can come down, I said. We don't have any records. In the 1990s, the Berkeley County Sheriff's Department computer crashed and burned. The paper records had been destroyed for file space, and so nothing from the 1980s remained. I asked to speak to any senior officer who might have been there at the time. He told me there was only one, and he had gone fishing. I spent a week on the road in Appalachia, visiting truck stops, interviewing the older truckers and waitresses. At first, I would ask about the girl in the dumpster, but no one had heard of her. So I asked if there had been any women found in truck stops. Wherever I went, I just discovered another connection to this story. Regina Walters was killed in Bond County, Illinois. I was raised in Bond County, Illinois. Oh, boy. Oh, this story must really resonate with you, TGI. Wow. Huh. Wherever I went, I was told nothing like that ever happened, which was remarkable given the number of bodies the FBI had tracked over the past 30 years. The newspapers were equally silent. It seemed It seems our profound fascination with serial killers is matched by an equally profound lack of interest in their victims. That's an interesting statement, huh? Kind of true. People are so into the serial killer, they don't even, the victims are just like names. That's true, I found. Someone who has done a serial killer show, people are much more interested in the killer. Huh. Never really thought about that, though. One library archivist explained that I was looking for the kind of news nobody wanted to read. The girl, he said, wasn't one of our own. She was a drifter. I'd never heard the word drifter used in earnest. It touched a nerve I didn't know I had. I had been a drifter. If what he said was true, the trail I was on had disappeared into a field. Out of desperation, I made one last attempt and swung by a smaller truck stop in Hancock, Maryland. I spoke to a woman who had worked there a long time. Where am I? Sorry. I told her about the dead hitchhiker while she fingered the gold cross on her neck and listened. Had she ever heard about it, I asked. She shook her head. Then her eyes clouded some. Wait a minute, there was that one girl. She was a prostitute. They found her near a dumpster behind the restaurant at the Gateway Travel Plaza in Breezewood. She had a stocking down her throat, I think. That was way back in the early 70s, though. It wasn't the early 70s. It was 1987. Excuse me. And the woman killed was 19-year-old LaMonica Cole. I found her in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette later that night. She had been strangled at Breezewood. Another prostitute had been grabbed there as well in 2006, but was found further down the road with her throat slit. Neither of these women were the one I was looking for, but a sentence in the article caught my attention. It said there had been a string of prostitute murders in truck stops in the area beginning in June of 1985, which was right on the edge of my time frame. This is Rhodes, the first picture we get of him. Do you guys see that? Yeah. Hey, we're up to 15 people here. Hey, everyone who just joined. Thanks for coming. We're pretty far into the story, but it is a really good one. So if you want to hang on and watch the rest of it, we're about 70-80% of the way through. We're just now getting to seeing the perpetrator. Anyone who wants to support the channel, the link is there in the description and in the chat. So I do appreciate you guys. So far, we have Nick G, who has supported with a $10 donation. Thank you to Nick. As well as we have one new member, Texas Roller Girl. Thank you, guys. So this is Mr. Rhodes. This is him today, of course, as a prisoner in the Illinois Department of Corrections. Well, I guess that would be where he killed Regina, right? Because I always wonder if when people kill all over the country, where the heck do they send them to prison? Guess they can move around, right? But he's in Illinois. Here he is. Well, this is him at the time of the writing of the article, which was 2012 anyway. So this is pretty old, this story. The next morning, I drove to the Gateway Travel Plaza in Breezewood, Pennsylvania. I thought that maybe in a truck stop where known murders had occurred, people would be more forthcoming. Maybe they would remember something the others hadn't. I parked in front of the Family Travel Plaza, then walked back past a sign that read trucks only. The store for professional drivers was clean and quiet. I asked around until I found someone who had been there in 1985. It was a woman, probably in her mid-50s. She came over and gave me an open smile. I asked her the same questions I was asking everybody. Did you ever hear about a hitchhiker and a dumpster? No, she said. Poor girl's having no luck. Did you ever hear of anything like that at all in other times, any other bodies of women found along this stretch of I-70? I was in the one place where I knew for certain women had been found, one less than 100 yards away from where she was standing. No, she said, I never heard of anything like that anywhere. I remember being in the woods off I-95. I only ran about 100 yards before I turned and hid because I didn't know if I was being chased. I crouched on netted twigs and breathed into my shirt to muffle the sound. Listening to her, it occurred to me that this investigation of mine wasn't a detective novel. It was a ghost story. The prisms of Regina Walters, Shanna Holtz, and Lisa Pennell refracted into a set of icons. One in the backseat of a car laughing as she leans on the headrest, one with the shoehorn, red gold hair, and an expression of resilience, one slightly crazy and ready to fight, each casting her own light, each a hologram of girlhood. Recently, the New Jersey State Supreme Court handed down a statement on memory, describing it as complex and often unreliable. That's very true. The ruling went on to question the admissibility of eyewitness testimony. Human memory is not like a video recording, they said, and they're right. It's more like a set of still photos. I remember coming down through the Blue Ridge Mountains in a truck with its brakes on fire and dropping over Chester Gap in the middle of the night when it was still hot and the air was loud with the chirping of bugs. Give me a second, guys. What's that? Give me 1 second, everyone. Sorry. Make sure it's not something important. Oh, it's just a friend. Okay. It's more like I said. I remember driving around Ohio, howling along with Bruce Springsteen and buzzed out of my brain on Diet Cokes and being sad that the ride ended because it was a safe one and I had almost been able to be myself for a second, but that second had passed. I remember a Fuel Island in the blue morning light and a driver with a white shirt that stood out like a flag. And taking the turn back east, then south, in a gray day just before a storm so pressurized my ears hurt. And I remember being in the woods off I-95. I only ran about 100 yards before I hid because I didn't know if I was being chased and needed to see. I crouched on netted twigs and breathed into my shirt to muffle the sound. The woods were blue in the gray light, which was either dusk or a coming storm. At the center of everything was my own breath. The birds went silent, and I didn't know what it meant. I watched the truck idle on the side of the road till it finally pulled off. One snowy night several months later, I was hitchhiking through Amherst, Massachusetts. That's a couple hours from me, about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And a car full of students from Hampshire College picked me up and let me stay with them. In the morning, they talked me into applying to the college. I was accepted, and that provided a thin strip of pride on which to stand while I made contact with my family. My mother was happy to pay for school. Being 16 and in college is an easier thing to talk about. It was a solution that worked for both of us and looked like redemption, but didn't last. The dissonance between my emotional world and the one around me was still too great, and soon I left again, but in a more sanctioned way. I hitchhiked in Europe and settled in Vienna for a few years. I lived among the artists in the Lower East Side squats. These are narratives we know. Unlike those of other young women on the road, my story was now recognizable. When I got home from West Virginia, a letter from Rhodes was waiting. It said he would see me if I promised never to say I had seen him or what had passed between us. It was just the kind of promise a sexual predator or child M-word would try to extract. He also wanted $500. I wrote him back and told him that journalistic standards wouldn't allow me to pay for interviews. I expected that to be the end of it, but I got another letter. Young was right. Rhodes liked to think of himself as an expert, and now Rhodes suggested he be paid as one. But an expert in what, I thought? Killing? At the bottom of the yellow legal papers, scrawled in all caps, he wrote, "It wasn't me," with all exclamation points. I looked at the letter. He may be right, but certainly not because he's innocent. I imagined for a moment flying to Illinois. I'd go through the paperwork, get fingerprinted, and led through a channel of airlock doors into a room with him. He's there with his neatly pressed shirt and colossal arrogance. We do the interview, but I don't take notes. It doesn't matter what he says. After all, it's just going to be his word against mine, and who's going to believe him? That's where my fantasy ends, in a game of who is credible now. Give me just one moment, guys. I have to just check one thing. All right, just bear with me. Sorry. Check one thing before we finish up on the story. We're moving along pretty good. Looks like it's going to be about 90 minutes. I only expected to be here for 30, so this is a heck of a long time. Thanks to everyone who stuck with me at this late night, early morning adventure. Okay. We've had a good 12 or 15 of you, but only a couple people in the chat. So I don't know who's here hanging out, but they're not saying hello. Hi to you guys. Oof. Allergies. Burning. Okay. Let's finish up here. Okay. One story. The same week I got the letter from Rhodes, the senior officer from the Berkeley County Sheriff's Department, who had been fishing, returned. He said that no girls had ever been found in a dumpster at the Martinsburg, West Virginia truck stop, and I had no reason not to believe him. One story Deborah Davis told still haunts me. She was on a trip with her husband, Bob, the last she ever took in his truck. They were heading west on I-10 and stopped somewhere in Arizona at a busy truck stop. By the restaurant door was a young woman with a baby trying to get a ride. Deborah said she looked about 18 or 19 and desperate. Deborah wanted to give her money or do something. Her own sister had been on the street. She was... Oh, thank you, TGI. No, I appreciate anything you said. Thank you. I don't see anything for it yet. As soon as I get it, I'll announce it. Give me 1 second. You sent it through the link, right? You know, it might just not be registering in my email. Let me give me 1 sec. I just want to make sure I credit you for it. Give me 1 second, guys. TGI sent something over. Oh, yeah, it's not, didn't register yet. Are you sure you sent it to the right one? You sent it to the link with the one at the end, right? Because usually it's pretty instant, but we'll give it a little time. Maybe it's taking time. All right. Where are we in the story here? Her own sister had been on the street, and she was overwhelmed by the woman at the door and didn't want to just walk away. Rhodes saw what Deborah was looking at. He came around behind her and grabbed her shoulders. He turned her slowly toward the girl and pointed. "You see that, Debbie?" he whispered in her ear. "She's one of the invisible people." It's an odd comment. Well, that's the end of the story. It's an odd way to end. Okay, so we actually don't find out. So I guess the best we got is him telling her that it wasn't him. But how do we know he wasn't lying? Not 100% wild about that ending. I thought it was going to be revealed that it was him. Again, this is him. I'll make it bigger on screen for you guys. This is the guy in well, this is him when he's younger. And this is him when he's older. Right here. Okay. TGI, yeah, that didn't come through. I don't know if you sent it to the wrong. Oh, there it goes. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. I'm assuming that's actually, hang on. Oh, yeah. There it is. Okay. Thank you so much. Whoops. Sorry, I don't know if you didn't want me to show your name there. I'll credit you as TGI. And TGI, thank you so much. And never apologize for the amount. Yeah, I'm sorry. It just took a while to register. That's my mistake. Sorry about that. But yeah, anything is helpful. Believe me, it makes a huge difference. So thank you so much. Hey, Kelly, we just finished the story. I read it. It was almost an hour and a half long. I expected it to be about 30 minutes. So you're kind of coming in at the very end here. We can stay a few more minutes. And we'll go. Yeah, I know what we can do. We can pick what story we'll do next week. How's that sound? We can do well, I was going to say we can vote, but here's the thing. You just got home. Oh, cool. Oh, baby shower. Awesome. Here's the thing, guys. We have about 15 people in here. However, nobody's really talking. So I was going to say we can pick our story for next week, but only Kelly and TGI. Is anyone else? Who else has talked around? And Chris. Oh, Shay in the beginning. Oh, Robin, Jilly. So I don't know who's still here. Out of the 15, not many people are talking, at least consistently. But let's see if we can pick a story for next week, or at least a category. That way we can round this out to an hour and a half. That was a long one, huh? Woo! I thought it was going to be a 30-minute story when I skimmed over how long it was. Boy, was I wrong. Okay. So, yeah, I don't have that one as an option, the Gabby and Brian one. It's a little website I found that has 25 true crime stories. The one we read today came out really good. People were pretty into it. Everyone who was here anyway. I really liked it. And these are them. So we have 1, 2, 3. The reason I am limiting it to these is they're a good length. Like most stories I find are like a few paragraphs. So it's way too short. Or there are obviously books, but that would take like multiple hours. These are about 90-minute long stories. So they're perfect for a little live. So I'm going to do 1 or 2 a week. So we have The Body in Room 348 by Mark Bowden, which is about a corpse found at the Elegant Hotel in Beaumont, Texas. We have The Case of the Vanishing Blonde. Again, a 21-year-old blonde disappears from a hotel room, unseen by security cameras. Well, not all of them have good explanations. There's 25 stories, though. Let me see. How I Became a Con Artist by Jason Jellick. That sounds interesting. Seeing if any of these sound interesting. The Ultimate Counterfeiter. That sounds good, right? Let me see. The Greatest Heist in British History by Mark Seal. So there's some good ones. And The Untold Story of the World's Biggest Diamond. So it's everything from murders to organized crime, which includes stuff about crime in USA, to cocaine stories, to the hunt for El Chapo. So we have all that stuff. We got white collar crime. We got scam stories, forgery stories, then robbery and theft stories. So lots of different options. The first one, that was, hey, what's the first one I read? The Body in Room 348, right? The corpse at the hotel. Okay. Next week we can do that one. Unless anyone has an objection, if you guys want to vote or whatever, but that sounds good to me. So we'll finish up here, guys. So far, we have Nick, who's donated $10, and TGI, who's donated $7. Thank you so much, guys. Makes a big difference. As we wrap up, let me make sure I think that those are the 2 donations. See if there's anyone else. Sometimes it takes a while to register. If any, it says thanks for the truck stop story. Yeah, if anybody else does, and I don't get it by the time we finish, we'll do it next. I'll credit you on the next show. So TGI says murders. So yeah, so Kelly said the first story, and TGI said murders. Well, the first story is a murder story, so that works out perfect. So we'll do the murder story of The Body in Room 348. That's next week, of course, because that story's about as long. Let me see. Yeah, it's about the same length. So if I was to do it now, we'd be here till 4 a.m. My time. It's 2:30 right now. Yeah, that one might be even longer. But it sounds good. The Body in Room 348. I'll read the little beginning for you guys. The corpse at the Elegante Hotel stymied the Beaumont, Texas police. They could find no motive for the killing of popular oil and gas man Greg Flanagan. So that's who the story's about. Fleniken. And no explanation for how he had received his strange internal injuries. Bent on tracking down his killer, Flanagan's widow, Susie, turned to private investigator Ken Brennan. The subject of a previous Vanity Fair story. Once again, as Mark Bowden reports, it was Brennan's sleuthing that cracked the case. So Mark Brennan is the author. Sounds good. All right, guys. Yeah, so we'll do that next week. Oh, and other than that went good, huh? That was kind of fun. I kind of enjoyed getting into it. I used to, when I was in high school, I mean, I always liked to read, but I'm a writer myself. A lot of you guys know that, or want to be anyway. And I'd go through phases where I'd read a lot, then I'd stop and all that. And one thing that really got me back into it is in 10th grade, I had a teacher. His name was Mr. Valente. I always wonder if he's still there at Malden High. And the way he would read books, it made you so into the books, man. Like, like there's always those bad kids in class and everything. He was one of those teachers that even the worst kids got super into the books because he like had different voices for all the characters. And so I was just like, oh, I would love to read, even if I could do halfway as good, get people into stories while I read. He always made me want to do that because he's one of the reasons I'm a writer today. And he was a really good teacher, really awesome guy. But yeah, I remember we read the book Shane. It's like about a cowboy. We read Of Mice and Men. We read The Outsiders. And, we read a few more, but I can't think of what they were. But God, that's really into the books anyways. Awesome teacher. But that's one I always kind of wanted to read stuff because of him. All right, guys. So I'm kind of stretching it out now. That is basically it. Thank you so much to everyone who hung out. Kelly, TGI. Everyone was trying to find everyone who's commented. Chris, Shay, Robin, and Jilly. And then Roller Skater Texas Girl. Again, thank you to Nick and TGI for the donations. And thank you to Roller Skater Texas Girl for the signing up to be a member. To Kill a Mockingbird. Actually, yeah, we did read that too, as a matter of fact. But that was a different grade. I read that. That wasn't with Mr. Valente. I think that was the next year or the year before. Only the books I read with him are the memorable ones to me. Oh, yeah, it's Halloween, huh? Jeez. I don't celebrate Halloween as I get older, so I always forget when it's Halloween. I don't even pay attention. But yeah, today is Halloween. Wow. Happy Halloween, everybody. How cool. Make sure you go and get some candy and be good to the kids coming by. Help them get plenty of cavities. I'm not a big celebrator of the holiday, but, let people have their fun and eat their candy. All right, guys, I love you. Thanks for joining me tonight for both the interview and for this little story. Yeah, let kids have their fun. Dress up as fun things and eat their candy. I'm not against it. I'm against some of the things behind it, but that's another story. All right, guys, I love you. Take care, and thank you to everyone who commented and donated and became a member and all that fun stuff. I love you, and I will see you next time. Within a couple days, we'll have another interview coming. All right, take care.